Welcome to episode 30. For those of you who follow my Twitter, you know that I'm down with a horrible sore throat and cough, which is why there was no regular Sunday upload. I was busy purging virus counters then. So thanks to everyone for your patience, as well as for putting up with my soft, hoarse, dulcet tones as I'm recovering. It'll stay that way until I fully recover. So some of you might be wondering, why are you even bothering uploading videos? Should be resting until you fully recover. Well, unfortunately, we live in a world where the Genteki.net developers are super efficient. They've managed to push the Devil and the Dragon update onto the main server in double time, so we are compelled to give Pack 4 of the Kitara cycle a bit of a shout. Today we'll be covering SSO Industries and CityWorks project. We'll start by talking about the former. This is a very interesting identity ability, but I misread it at first when it was spoiled. I thought that you would be able to place advancement tokens on ice equal to the total number of advancement tokens on public agendas. Well, sadly that's not the case. So even if I have 5 advanced CityWorks projects incubating in a remote, I can't just pop 5 advancement counters on an Orion and res it for free. That is the dream, but nope, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to make a deck where we advance CityWorks projects to 20,000 advancement tokens and get strength 20,000 ice walls and colossus. That's not going to happen. Instead, what we are going to do is that we can only place advancement counters equal to the number of agenda points the public agendas are worth. We also note that you can only place said advancement tokens on ice that do not currently have any advancement tokens on them, meaning that you cannot buff an ice to ungodly amounts of strength by repeatedly targeting it with SSO Industries. So, to analyze how powerful SSO Industries is as an identity, we have to ask ourselves, how powerful are the ice with advancement tokens on them, and how powerful are the face-up agendas? Because that's exactly what this is, an identity that enables public agendas and advanceable ice in a single package. So let's start with the public agendas. Now, SSO Industries actually says face-up agendas. So technically, you can actually use this to along with casting call or transparency initiative to trigger SSO Industries on agendas that are not initially public agendas, thereby getting perhaps 4 advancement tokens using Vanity Project or 6 advancement tokens using Government Takeover. However, this is out of scope of the current discussion. Instead, we'll focus on the existing public agendas. There are 5 of them, and because of the way SSO Industries works, underway renovation is by far the worst of them. It does not synergize directly with SSO Industries game plan at all, and it only gives a single measly advancement token because it's only worth 1 agenda point. It's pretty crap. Let's not even put it in the picture. Now, what about the 2-point agendas? Oaktown renovation in particular is pretty amazing if you think about it. If you let it incubate in your secure remote and keep buffing the ice with SSO Industries, you can potentially play like a runner because Oaktown suddenly becomes your magnum opus and you are clicklessly distributing 2 advancement counters to every single ice you install. So that sounds really, really good, but then we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of a double advanced ice? And it turns out not that good. Because of this, we see that SSO can potentially cheat in a lot of ice onto the table with 2 advancement counters each every single turn. Unfortunately, right now with the pool of advanceable ice we have, 2 advanced ice are not that good. The best I can think of is a 6 strength Colossus, which sounds okay. It's kind of like an archer that doesn't end the run. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that, you see, because as you might guess, with the space ice and the parenthesis ice in Colossus, Hotham, and so on, these are all at their maximum when there are 3 advancement counters on the ice. So 2 doesn't really cut it. Because of this, the 2 advanceable agendas are not that good in SSO. It directly ties in with the power level of the advanceable ice, the public agendas you have, as well as SSO Industries identity ability. What we really want is to have 3 advancement tokens on our ice from the get-go. So that way we can threaten a whole host of nasty effects, from tutoring cards on Hotham to dealing damage on Monsters to trashing resources even on Colossus. And for the space ice, being able to res ice on 0 credits is especially amazing, especially given that there are quite a few D-res based criminal decks out there nowadays. So the bottom line is because of the nature of the advanceable ice in the current card pool, we want to play 3-point public agendas in SSO Industries. If in the future they print advanceable ice that work the best when there are 2 advancement counters on it, we can review this conclusion. But until then, we want to play the 3-point agendas. Enter CityWorks Project, the new 3-point public agenda released in the same pack. CityWorks Project is the defensive Wayland agenda for this cycle. If you recall, we have Ikawa Project from HB, we have the Green Mill from NBN, and in the previous pack we had Obo Carter from Jinteki. Wayland finally gets its own defensive agenda. However, it has a very different trigger point from the other 3 agendas in that it doesn't have an additional cost to steal, meaning that it is actually equally vulnerable as any other 5-3 agenda on centrals, making it a lot worse than the 3 defensive agendas that I mentioned earlier. In fact, it has the exact opposite trigger of the Future Perfect. Future Perfect only works when it's not installed. You get the side game that defends it 2 in every 3 times. CityWorks Project, on the other hand, cannot protect itself on centrals at all. However, it protects itself when it is installed, which encourages aggressive scoring plays in a CityWorks Project deck. You want to be installing this agenda, you want to be advancing it in a remote to increase the punishment factor, because it does more meat damage the more advancement tokens there are on it. The key point, however, is that this boosts SSO Industries in a different way. Not only does it have the meat damage threat, it provides the important critical mass needed for SSO Industries. Previously, we only had Hollywood renovation, so you can only stuff your deck with 3 public 3-point agendas, meaning that SSO wasn't that good before. With CityWorks Project, you can run 3 Hollywoods and 3 CityWorks. Suddenly, 18 of your 20 agenda points are now 3-pointers that are public, and that is very, very crucial, because it means that you can enact your game plan of populating the board with lots of 3 advanced ice very reliably. There are six of these big agendas in your deck. Very likely you'll find one of them early on. More on CityWorks Project outside of SSO. This agenda is obviously countered by Film Critic. You get to hold CityWorks onto the Film Critic before it does damage to you as the runner. As we mentioned, CityWorks is not an additional cost, which means that if you have meat damage protection, you can evade the meat damage and still steal the agenda, which is a downside to running this agenda. However, there's a silver lining in this. If the runner somehow commits to an access and then realizes they don't have enough cards or hit points in hand to steal the CityWorks, they are committed to taking the damage against their will. They can't say, I'm not going to steal this agenda, but I don't want to take the damage either. That is what you usually do when you access an Obo Carter with fewer than 4 cards in hand. You can't do that for CityWorks. If you access a CityWorks with fewer than 4 cards in hand, boom, you are dead. Or, sorry, not 4 cards, fewer than X cards, where X is the amount of meat damage CityWorks deals. So, this is very important to keep in mind. If you have some way to deal damage in a paid ability window, you know, something like a House of Knives, Well, yeah, not gonna play House of Knives with CityWorks project in regular constructed Netrunner, but something like that could easily set up a flatline for you. So that's CityWorks project. Now back to SSO Industries and how to build around it. Arguably, the more important part about building an SSO deck is considering what kind of ice you have access to. So we are already committed to running these three agenda point public agendas. Let's look at the three advanced ice, which I'll abbreviate to 3ADV from now on. 3ADVs are not particularly taxing. If you think of the space ice, your asteroid belt, your wormhole, or the parenthesis ice, these are not really taxing. I know a 7-strength Colossus sounds amazing, but because it doesn't have a lot of subroutines, runners typically have ways to circumvent it, be it a femme fatale, bypassing for 2 credits, or David, 2 counters on David, Nowadays, the real way to tax runners out is to have lots of subroutines. Space ice and parenthesis ice do not provide that. Instead, what 3 advanced ice boasts is that they have incredibly punishing subroutines. So if a runner face checks one of these ice without the correct breaker, they could be in for a treat. And because of that, Marcus Batty further amplifies the power of these ice. So we really want to be playing Marcus Batty in such a deck because you can so reliably get these 3 advanced ice out on the table. Finally, it's important to note that some of the 3 advanced ice are relatively cheap to res. In fact, if you look at my ice list on the right, everything is res for 4 credits or cheaper, making SSO Industries a perfectly viable deck to go full rush. We assemble lots of ice that the runner finds difficulty breaking early on, and we just pump out those agendas before the runner can assemble their rig. So that's our game plan. These are the ice that you wish you had if you want to play a taxing deck, a slow grindy game where you put lots of advancement counters on your ice. Unfortunately, these ice that gain subroutines with advancement counters are all dead. They've all rotated, so we can't really play the taxing strategy, in my opinion. So here's the full list that we are going to play today. As mentioned, we gotta go fast, so our main game plan is always going to be the same. We prioritize setting up a well-iced remote, ideally at least 2 ice of different subtypes, barrier, code gate, sentry. We start jamming 5-3 agendas in there as soon as possible, and if we have dedication ceremony in hand, advance it with dead ceremony, which allows us to get these agendas into our score area that much faster, saving clicks, saving credits, and attempt to score 6 agenda points before the runner assembles the entire rig. At that point, all we need is one more hostile takeover to close out the game. So that's the game plan. Some of you might be wondering, you showed a lot of barriers and code gates that are advanceable. What about the advanceable sentries in Nebula and Colossus? Colossus is an ice that I really, really love. Unfortunately, this is not a good metagame choice right now. Trash a program is actually a pretty awful subroutine in a meta where the conspiracy or heap breakers are prevalent. There's no point in trashing the runner's programs when they can easily come back to life, unless you're Scorpio's defense systems, which we are not. It's also important to note that neither of these sentries, or the advanceable sentries in general, end the run, which is very crucial for a rush strategy. We need to stop them from getting in the remote. Nebula and Colossus do not do that. They also do not help against heap sacrificial construct either, which is another problem card that shapers will often run. Instead, as you may have noticed from the decklist, we are running Snake or Cobra. Cobra obviously trashes the program as well, but the main reason we are running it is for the 2 net damage. The net damage is especially essential when the runner is trying to contest a CityWorks project. That damage might be the difference between them being able to steal CityWorks and them having to jack out after the run. So that is the plan with this deck. Let's see how fast we can go in our playthrough. Today we are up against Omar, which is a very, very scary runner because we don't intend to defend our centrals much. against a runner who's very aggressive on centrals, this could spell early doom for us. Doubly so if they happen to be playing an Apocalypse version. I'll just state outright right now that my SSO build right now is pathetic against Apocalypse. And that's because obviously you're trying to rush out in a remote. This means that your centrals are incredibly vulnerable. And I think this applies to most SSO decks in general, unless you're building a very slow grindy deck, but even then, that means you're foregoing advancement counters early on for central ice. So yeah, it's not good either way. So I'm gonna keep my opening hand here simply because it has no agendas. This way, Omar's pressure on HQ will not net them much in terms of getting to match point quickly. I'm going to drop the paywall here to further deter my opponent from running. If they keep plinking away for single accesses, well, I'm going to get money, clickless money while at it, which is pretty good. Now I draw into a fast track. This is a very tempting card to play out right now, because I did put a Morcelus on my remote, so I can threaten a lot of damage and tags if they choose to face check it. So it's very unlikely that they will face check it unless they have their correct breakers in the bin. So I think it should be pretty safe for me to get this CityWorks project in the remote, and most importantly, get those advancement counters going. I need the asteroid belt on R&D to actually be resable. I'm not gonna res it for 9 cost, I want it to be 0 cost. So having this CityWorks in the remote will do wonders for me. My opponent goes for the early Maw and starts playing aggressively on my centrals, trashing my paywall with Maw. So that's pretty awful, because I do want to keep my Arc Lockdown in my hand in case my opponent decides to ditch their bin breakers. So I'm just going to continue playing fast here as I draw into my second fast track, which allows me to get yet another agenda out. So I could potentially chain agendas here. So yep, getting my city work out, but my opponent responds with a well-timed early Armor Qua. Now the Armor Qua snipes my fast track. I still have my Arc locked down, but it's looking a lot more useless as my opponent finds their Universal AI Breaker. While not quite universal, as I find my Hortum. So Hortum is going to be amazing when put on this remote, because it instantly gets 3 advancement counters, and now my opponent has to fear that every single 3 advanced ice out there could be the Hortum that they can't break with Armor Qua. They cannot afford to run into any of my ice yet without installing a Black Orchestra. So this is the true power of SSO Industries. Even against a powerful AI breaker like Armor Qua, my opponent needs to respect the potential for Hortum to be an ice, and that they will be severely punished if they face check 1. And every single 3 advanced ice could be that Hortum. They steal a hostile takeover, meaning that I only have 1 more remaining in my deck as they go into HQ and access Arc Lockdown, mowing away an Audacity. So the jig is up. They know that Arc Lockdown is something they have to respect coming from me. Now, unfortunately, I draw into my Hollywood renovation here. My opponent did not run R&D this turn apparently, which means that they did run R&D. They stole the hostile takeover, but the very next card, which they did not check, was the Hollywood renovation. So the Hollywood goes in the remote here as my opponent maws away my Arc Lockdown. I'm trying to score this Hollywood as quickly as possible before my opponent finds their Black Orchestra. If I can get up to 6 agenda points, I have an out in scoring the final hostile takeover in my deck for the win. Now, because they knew about the Arc Lockdown in my hand, they were able to guess 1 on the RNG key, and they rightfully drew 2 cards with RNG key, allowing them to accelerate their game with a Career Fair into daily casts. So at this point, I would say that I am currently losing the game, even though I'm up 3 agenda points to 1. My board state is not looking very good. I have no tools in my hand thanks to Maw, and it's going to be very difficult for me to score this agenda if they find their Black Orchestra. So it's turn 6. They haven't drawn too many cards yet, but they are very lucky in top decking their Black Orchestra. So they're going to get a couple more Armor Qua counters by doing an Omar run on R&D here, seeing no agendas, but they are going to be able to run my remote and contest it. I have Hortum into Morcelus, which costs exactly 5 credits to break, and guess what? They do have the 5 credits needed to siege my remote. So if the Hollywood renovation had been a City Works, they would not have been able to contest this. They do not have enough cards in hand to steal it. Unfortunately, I'm going to concede this remote, and that's a very huge loss for me. The only thing I can do at this point is to bluff that the innermost ice is an Orion, which is what I'm going for, and thankfully my opponent bought the bluff. They jacked out after breaking the Hortum. So I think this was a mistake from my opponent, not because they guessed the inner ice wrongly, but because they made the run on the remote. They knew that the outer ice on my remote was a Hortum. They knew I top decked it because they were locking my R&D with Omar. So they knew that was Hortum. They knew that they would have to spend 3 credits to break it, and they knew the inner ice had 5 advancement counters at the start of its turn. If they thought that was an Orion, they should not have ran the remote, because that set them back economically and in terms of clicks, wasting a click to run that remote. So that was a mistake from my opponent in running the remote. If they should not have ran it in the first place if they were scared of the Orion. Well, of course, I managed to escape that escapade unscathed, but tongue twisting when I'm having a sore throat. But things are about to take a turn for the worse for me, as they are going to double lock my R&D with Bagat. So they're going to access the top of R&D, get a more mill, then they run HQ to get the Bagat mill. Then they're going to run R&D again. This time they have a lot of Omaqua counters, so they don't have to worry about any ice that can throw at them. Even though I can res this asteroid belt for free, that bad publicity means that there's no point in resing it when they can break it for 1 credit. So here, I'm struggling to think of a way to win the game. Obviously, my only out is the 1 hostile takeover in my deck. I can't keep them out of my remote any longer, so I need to win on hostiles. But if they ever top deck a hostile from R&D, I'm going to lose, and they are going to see 2 cards of R&D every single turn. If I draw into the hostile takeover, they could potentially run my HQ a bunch of times and steal my second hostile, which is my last hostile, shutting me out of any sort of win. So this is looking very bad for me, but I find myself an illegal arms factory which my opponent did not trash. After thinking for some time, I realized this was the out I was looking for. Hostile takeover draws me through the lock of my opponent, because my opponent is stuck single accessing R&D. Sure, they can Bagat mill, but at most they can only see the top card of R&D. Illegal arms allows me to draw 2 cards off the top of R&D, so if the second card is a hostile takeover, I instantly win the game. You'll also note that one of the ways in which I can win is to fast track hostile and then audacity the hostile for the win, fast advancing in the same turn. But because my one-off audacity was knocked out of my hand by more earlier on, that is not an option. I draw into further options with Marcus Batty on my first click draw, and I decide to install it in the remote, because this could potentially give me yet another out in scoring a 5-3 agenda through the remote under the protection of Marcus Batty. If I draw a 5-3 agenda before seeing the second hostile, my deck is starting to thin. There are still a lot of agendas unaccounted for. 4 big agendas, 1 hostile takeover in 19 cards of R&D. So my opponent is still placing pressure. They haven't seen many agendas of R&D yet, but it seems like it's going to give way sooner or later. So I need to be able to push an agenda through server 1 when I draw into it. Illegal Arms still turns out blank here. So I'm going to draw click 1. Right? So you want to draw through the R&D lock because they are not running HQ very often. If I find a hostile takeover, I could easily win. It's a CityWorks project. So after thinking for a bit, I realized that this CityWorks is not going to live very long in my HQ. It's safer in the remote with Marcus Batty. So I'm going to put in the remote, and I'm going to ice up archives here to deter Omar from running rampant on R&D in HQ, since I had nothing better to do with my last click anyway. So my opponent obviously attacks the unguarded HQ and starts thinking of whether they should contest the remote. Now they have more than enough virus counters on Omaqua to deal with an Orion, so they could potentially go into my remote. By the way, I could have also iced all 3 centrals and purged virus counters. The reason I didn't do that is that they would eventually win if I spend that much time purging virus counters, because it allows them to set up the economy and the breakers so that they can break my ice even though they have no armor core counters. So they do run my remote here, and I'm gonna pause the video here and ask you, how would you play out this run? Do you res the innermost Morcelus? Do you fire the Marcus Batty? And which subroutine do you fire the Batty on? I'll leave a copy of my deck list for reference. Pause the video and think about how you would approach this run. So the first question here is, do we res Morcelus? The main consideration here is that the runner actually approaches Morcelus with 3 credits remaining. So by resing Morcelus here, we can induce the runner to spend all of their hard-earned credits on breaking Morcelus. Therefore, we can, after that, play the Batty side game when the runner's on 0 credits, ensuring a side game win. And that is very important, because that way we get to fire off one of our key ice subroutines. Then that's the follow-up question. Which of these key subroutines do we fire? Now, first we must always consider the 3 net damage option from Morcelus whenever we have a City Works in the remote, because we can set up a very easy cheesy flatline. Unfortunately, we did not have the foresight this game to advance the City Works in the remote. Had I advanced it even a single time in the previous turn, the runner would have to take 3 meat damage on access, plus the 3 net damage from Morcelus. That would flatline them, since they only had 5 hit points. So in an alternative universe, this would have been a possible option, but in the current scenario, we have to settle for the Hortum subroutine. Take 2 cards from R&D and end the run. So this is a very good option regardless, but it's especially powerful if we are on 6 agenda points like we are, because that way, filtering up hostile takeover is an easy no-brainer option. So we are definitely going to spend one of our searches for hostile takeover. The real question is, what else do we search for with Hortum? Well, the runner has 1 remaining click. With their last click, they will surely run HQ to fetch the hostile takeover that we just brought up. So the other card that we fetch with Hortum must be a card that helps us win in the event that they snipe the hostile from our hand. That 20% chance could happen. So is there a single card that can guarantee us the win even if our opponent steals our second hostile? As you see from the game footage here, my opponent indeed bankrupts themselves on breaking the Morcelus, thereby giving me the Marcus Batty trigger. I took the hostile takeover as well as dedication ceremony, because if they steal the hostile from my hand, my next turn would be dedicate City Works and double advance it. Sure, I won't be able to score the City Works that very turn because of the restriction on dedication ceremony, but that would leave me with an agenda ready to pump out for the next turn. That is 5 advance. City Works will defend itself with 5 advancement counters. The runner needs to have 7 hit points to soak up the 7 meat damage from City Works, which they simply can't afford if they start their turn on 0 credits. They need a bare minimum of 4 credits to get through my remote, 3 to break the Hortum with Black Orchestra, and 1 to break the end run on Morcelus. They still have to contend with the net damage from Morcelus. So yeah, dedication ceremony would ensure the win. But it did not matter as my opponent failed to snipe this hostile from hand, so I fast advanced it to win anyway. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed by City Works project as an agenda in my Rush deck. Even though defensive agendas are typically associated with slow Glacier decks because they passively defend your centrals, that is not what you exactly need in a Rush deck. You want to force your opponent, the runner, to play your remote game, and City Works project feeds very well into that, as it punishes the runner for stealing your agenda in your remote. It also synergizes very nicely with my particular deck's game plan because I'm using subroutines that deal net damage, like the 3 advanced Morcelus as well as Cobra, in order to make it that much harder to steal city works. The identity is pretty interesting. I thought it was tier 1.5, but as I said, I misread it, thinking that it would give advancements equal to the number of advancement counters on public agendas, making it a bit worse in my opinion, but it's still pretty decent. I think at the end of the day, you can't evaluate SSO Industries in a vacuum. You need to look at the advanceable ice that are available in the card pool to determine how good it will be. As you saw in this game, the threat of Unres triple advanced ice was basically what carried me this game, because my opponent was too afraid of the 5 advanced, possibly Orion as the inner ice. I was able to score the second big agenda in the Hollywood renovation. Furthermore, the Batty into a 3 advanced Hotem was what got me into the final agenda point, because I was able to search my deck for the winning hostile. That wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the advancement tokens given by SSO Industries. So yeah, if the advanceable ice are powerful and they threaten the runner and discourage them from running, or their subroutines are impactful and fetch you the game-winning combo pieces, that is when SSO Industries becomes good. On the other hand, if your ice all gets sliced like Swiss cheese by breakers like Omaqua, for example, then SSO Industries suddenly doesn't look too hot, and that's what exactly happened this game. Had I not won there and then with my 7th agenda point, my opponent would have easily rampaged all over my servers, because I had no answer once my opponent got Omaqua and Black Orchestra set up. So again, SSO Industries is very much tied, their power level is very much tied to the advanceable ice that they can run. It's also important to note that SSO is the kinds of decks that SSO enables is also dependent on the kind of ice that is available. If we get better advanceable ice for glacier strategies in the future, SSO might become more suited to be a glacier deck. I don't see that right now because there are too few such ice. Colossus, Firewall, that's about it. These ice can become very high strength, but they fall to Bypass, they fall to David. Yeah, that because of that, I don't think Glacier SSO is there yet, but I could be wrong. Some of you might have some great ideas for non-rush SSO Industries. If you do, please share your deck ideas in the comments section. Decklist especially welcome, because as you can tell, I've been pretty much out of action this entire week thanks to my horrible viral condition. As such, I haven't really seen that many SSO decks in action. I would love to hear what you all have been up to, and more importantly, how you all have been finding SSO. Has it exceeded or has it exceeded your expectations, or is it underwhelming? I have various other ideas for SSO that I would that I had floating around. Maybe some of you have the same ideas as me and would like to share your experiences with them. Would really appreciate if you can leave it in the comment section. Till next time, thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll see you hopefully when I get better. Goodbye.